Welcome to the October 20th, 2015 Port Commission meeting. At 1 o'clock, I opened the public meeting and we immediately recessed to our executive session. I'd now like to close that executive session and reconvene the public meeting. And our first item is roll call. Let the record show that all three commissioners are present.
Present.
The first item is the public comment period. Do we have anyone signed up, Diane?
Commissioners, we do not.
Okay, so we can move on to our consent agenda. Gentlemen, do you have any question on the consent agenda?
I don't.
Two simple items on it. Did you have any question?
A motion to approve consent agenda items A and B.
Okay, hearing no questions or comments. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Let the record show that passes 3-0. The next item on the agenda is a legislative report as a presentation.
Today we want to give you a recap of the 2015 legislative session and then also a preview of the 2016 legislative session. It's my pleasure to welcome Tom McBride from McBride Associates. Tom is a lobbyist that's been hired by the port, the city, and the county to represent shared legislative goals down in Olympia. And Tom is going to give a recap of the 2015 session and then a preview of what we're looking at in the 2016 session.
Welcome, Tom.
Thank you. Thanks, Mike. Tom McBride for McBride Public Affairs and representing the port. And as you know, you have a unique arrangement with us for representation in Olympia, and that is you work with the city and county to jointly advance your interests. It's a unique arrangement and looked upon by many around the state. I think we've mentioned to you before, and I think it's working quite well. You certainly get the legislators' attention when you appear on the same page with your fellow folks out of Whatcom County and Bellingham. So I applaud you for that unique approach in Olympia. We had a good session down there, and I think we got some good results. What I wanted to do was in pretty quick order here, and I'm happy to take any questions as I move through it pretty quickly. Don't wait till the end if you have any questions. But what I want to do is provide you with a quick political overview, quickly hit the budgets, the operating, the capital, the transportation budgets, and then highlight some of the bills. And as I mentioned, you had a joint legislative agenda to advance all three entities' interests in Olympia, and you're familiar with that as you've approved it, but we did make some headway on that. Not everything was accomplished, more work to do, but we did make some headway, and I think that's particularly important to recognize in light of some of the budget concerns and the budget challenges that still exist to this day despite the recovery of the economy. So first, let me say thank you for allowing us to represent you in Olympia. We enjoy it. It's important work, and we're happy to do that with you, because you, as you know, you do come down and help us advance. All of you come down every year to make your case in Olympia, and that's what really makes it work well, because they need to see you down there, the representatives and senators from the 40th and 42nd, in addition to others around the state. So first, keep in mind, politically in Olympia, we have a Democratic governor, Governor Inslee, but what has changed in the last few years is the tight margin of control. In the Senate, we have the Republican-controlled body by a count of 25-24, and then one Democrat caucuses with the Republicans, so that creates a count of 26-23. So that's pretty tight. It doesn't take too many votes from the other side to change the outcome of an issue. In the House, that margin has been getting closer as well, controlled by the Democrats still, but by a count of 51-47. And there is a special election in the 30th district this fall, next month. That's Federal Way area. So one of those appointees from when one of the legislators passed last year is up for re-election, challenged by a Republican. So that could sway the control, of course. That could move one seat to the Republican side of the ledger, or it could stay 51-47. But even that circumstance is pretty tight. So that's a relatively new development in the last few years, and it changes the way issues are handled down there and the way budgets are written. So, what has dominated in Olympia? The budget, and we've been saying that for 6-8 years, right? And I don't need to tell you that. It's dominating your agenda here as well, I'm sure. But a couple factors that have added on to the difficulty is not just a slowing economy, and that's changed, it's recovering now, but a Supreme Court decision that you're familiar with, the McCleary Court decision, which has said that the legislature, the state, is not honoring its constitutional obligations to adequately fund basic education. So for the last few years, couple budget cycles, that has been the focus. How can the legislature put more money into basic education? It's not easy, and it's especially not easy when revenues are going down. Now that revenues are coming back up, it's certainly not easy. There have been a lot of needs that have been put on the back burner that are now, people are coming back and saying, hey, we need more money for other things as well. Programs, as you know, cost more over time. They grow, and they cost more as inflation occurs. So McCleary decision has compelled the legislature to put quite a bit more money into basic education. They're not finished yet, and as you know, there is a contempt order in place holding the state in contempt for a failure to put a plan in place to satisfy that Supreme Court decision. So we'll see what happens in this next short session in 2016. It's a short session, 60 days, as opposed to this year's 105 days, not counting the 3 special sessions that took it to 176 days. But they will be back focusing on McCleary. I don't know how much they're going to be able to put in during a short session. The deadline for completion of the issue, of the mandate, is really around 2018, so there is a little bit of time left. But with that contempt order in place, it's putting an inordinate amount of pressure on the legislature to take action more quickly. And that's really important to understand that context as we look at our objectives for 2016. So that's what I would say is dominating the discussions down there. What I want to quickly get into is a quick operating budget overview. The budget this year is $38 billion, and that's a 2-year budget. It's up considerably from the 13-15 budget. It's an increase of about $4 billion. That's a big increase, and it represents the basic education costs that have to be funded, and it also represents some delays in funding other important programs, social service programs, for example, higher education programs. But a $4 billion increase in spending is significant. But what's remarkable about that is the recovering economy that I referred to. It's a $4.4 billion increase. About $4 billion of it was filled through organic means, growth in existing revenue through increased tax collection. So that's the good news. There were a couple changes made, some closing of tax incentives or phasing out of tax incentives overall, and some other cost-saving measures. But overall, that gap was filled pretty much with existing revenue, so that was good news. On the capital side, $4 billion budget passed. That is of great interest to this organization. Some of those funds that were earmarked for Bellingham cleanup efforts on the waterfront that you are so involved in, some of those are uncertain right now because some of those monies that were approved in the budget are funded through the MOTCA funds, and you're very familiar with that, Model Toxics Control Act. The problem with that fund is the projections of revenue have not come in as expected because the decreasing price in oil. It's that simple. And I think Department of Ecology representative was here a couple weeks ago, a month ago, so to give you an update on that. And as you know, about a third of the projected MOTCA revenue coming in is not expected to come in. So some of those projects that were on the list that are very important to you, we don't know if they're going to be funded or not. And I know Department of Ecology has a plan to at least create a short-term solution to that problem, but it's something we'll be continuing to work on because, as you know, it's very important to keep those long-term cleanup projects in place. I mean, that's how you bid them, and that's how you move them forward with predictability, knowing money's going to keep coming in for funding purposes. And if they don't get funded, it causes some real problems. So that's something we'll be continuing to work on. I want to highlight for you a couple other projects moving over to the transportation side. We've been working on the behalf of all three entities to support a transportation revenue package. This year it got through to the tune of about $16 billion, and it's funded primarily, not entirely, but primarily with the gas tax increase, about 11.9 cents in all, bringing $16 billion. A number of projects in our area here were funded, and I'll just highlight a few of them: the Slater Road interchange, the Baker View project, the I-5 Blaine extension. Those projects and others were included in the package, which would be very good for our area. I also want to highlight something that was in here. It's some alternative transportation options, safe routes to school, for example, bike routes, pedestrian routes, and some transit money. They are also in that $16 billion package. That did receive quite a bit of press and interest because there was some language in that budget bill that said if some low carbon fuel standard legislation went forward or regulation went forward, it might move some of that transit alternative transportation money out of the transportation budget. That did not happen, so the bill moved forward in its full capacity there, signed by the governor after passing both bodies of the legislature. So I think that's a big development. We hadn't seen a big transportation package in about 10 years, so it was needed, as you know. And then finally, moving on to a few bills to highlight for you. One of the ones that you all talked about when you came down, and it was the subject of one of our one-pagers, which we like to use so liberally in Olympia. This is Marine Trades at Work in Whatcom County, but it's a marine tourism bill, and it was moved, the language from that bill was moved into a tax incentive bill, 6057, and it passed, and it's going to provide some nice relief and assistance for the marine tourism industry statewide, including here in Bellingham, and it provides an exemption from some permit requirements when an out-of-state resident or out-of-state owner of a boat comes in to get repair work done in the community. So that was something we've been working on for a number of years, and that got through. CURB funding, Community Economic Revitalization Board funding, went through to the tune of about $10 million. Some aluminum tax incentives that you're familiar with up here were extended to 2027. The transportation budget has some ferry construction and operations money in it of about $600 million. I don't think anyone thinks that was sufficient to fully fund the program, but it was nice for the legislature and helpful for them to put some additional money into that transportation budget for funding of some of those ferry requirements. The aquatic invasive species bill that you've supported here received about $300,000 for some study needs. And also some liquor revenue for local governments was doubled from last year to about $50 million. There were some tough developments, too, that we've seen in the past. You've seen sweeps of different funds for general fund purposes when we didn't have enough money to fund some of the necessary programs. We've seen it in MOTCA. We've seen it in Public Works Assistance Account. MOTCA was spared, fortunately, particularly in light of some of the reductions in anticipated revenue. But the Public Works Assistance Account was hit to the tune of about $73 million. So that's not good, because those are dollars that really help with investments and economic development programs in the community. So those are the highlights I wanted to focus on for 2015, looking into the 2015-17 budgets that I talked about. And then Focusing a little bit on 2016, Mr. Hogan's going to talk just a little bit about the 2016 agenda that's been proposed by the three entities once again. And I want to emphasize to you the McCleary issue survives. That will put pressure on the legislature. It will make it difficult to secure funding for new programs because any available funds will likely be pushed to basic education to satisfy that McCleary Supreme Court decision. But we also will have some other policy issues out there, and one that I want to note in particular relates to that language from the transportation bill. Will there be some climate change efforts, some carbon cap efforts legislatively or through regulation? And right now, the anticipation is that will be a push of this administration, Governor Inslee's administration, but it likely will occur through regulation. And we can expect to see some proposed rulemaking on carbon cap efforts probably as early as December. But it does appear that that'll be done through the regulatory process as opposed to the legislative process, partly because it's a short session and tough to get something through of that magnitude in that short amount of time. So Mr. Hogan will hit on some other issues, but certainly available to answer any questions for you from the 15 session or looking ahead to 16.
Thank you. Gentlemen, any questions?
The oil train safety bill, ESHB 1449. So did that come with some money, and what does that mean for us locally?
Yeah, thanks.
I mean,
for bringing
we're
that
not
up.
getting money, obviously, but if the legislature doesn't fund it, then it's just interesting.
Thanks for bringing that up because it is on my list here and I overlooked it. But 1449, that's a really good thing for local governments. I mean, I think, to a large extent, that was one of the primary purposes of pushing that bill through, was to get some money to help local governments with emergency planning and preparedness. But there was an increase to the UTC fees that are assessed against the revenues of the loads that are coming through on the train. So that was increased from 1.5% to 2.5%. And then it will likely be distributed to local governments through a grant program. Applications will be made from local governments for that funding. But it is anticipated that'll be used for emergency preparedness, so it should be available to all communities that are affected by the oil trains.
All right, because I think every single port property has a train running through it somewhere. I'm trying to think, I don't think there is. Blaine? Sumas? Everything down here.
And I'll tell you, I'm not suggesting to you that there will be enough money.
Well, yeah, and we don't even have a fire department, but Neil's probably, our best resource in tapping into whatever's happening with that anyway. So, so that's good.
That was an interesting bill, too. Probably don't have time to go into it at length, but watching the stakeholders come together, the railroads, the oil producers, the first responders, the local governments. I mean, it was a large group of people who ultimately came together really and agreed on some language in this bill.
And then two other, one is quick, the House Bill 1681 under per diem rates. Do you have any idea why that was even brought up? Because it seems kind of esoteric and unnecessary. But
the per diem rates for the ports?
Yes.
My understanding was, as I recall, that what they were trying to do was just tie it to a standard that would adjust for inflationary costs over time. Because I think it was set, if I recall correctly, I can go back and look, I think it was set to a particular amount, and a lot of people want to tie those to some inflationary factor, so you don't have to change it. You don't have to go into the law and change it when costs go up.
It's always interesting to see something that, I guess it affects all of us, but wasn't really an issue for hardly any of us. So that's kind of weird. The final question I've got is about the transportation package. So when these conversations occur in regards to transportation, it always seems to be about road capacity, how much funding is going to go to transit and alternatives to single occupancy vehicles and that sort of thing. The ports ever, other than just having our folks show up and sort of lobby on our behalf, do we ever really get a smaller ports, let me put it that way. Do the smaller ports ever really get a seat at that table, or are we even included in that kind of thing? Because in the federal level, when you're talking about transportation budgets, the ports, although underfunded nationally, at least get a seat at the table and are listened to. So how does it work here in Washington?
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say the ports are at the table. They absolutely are involved and I'd say deeply involved in transportation discussions.
Outside of Seattle and Tacoma, though, because those folks, it's always about access for those trucks.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But I mean, the association's always involved in the discussions. Because you're picking up so many different types of transportation too. You got the rail, you got ships, you got airports. So I found, I mean, traditionally, I think historically they've been deeply involved. But it sounds like what you're getting to a little bit is there's such a focus on roads in any package vis-a-vis some of the unique needs of ports, or particularly the big ports. And I don't know if that's as much about ports as it is about just limited amounts of money and trying to dish out the projects around the state where the needs are. Because I think everyone would say they're not getting enough to meet the needs.
All right,
But
thank you.
I do think you've got a voice, and I know that transportation chairs both are and the ranking members are all very involved with the ports.
I think a port commissioner's running for governor too, so that if he wins, it might help.
That's true.
Thank you.
One question I had was, how many municipalities do you have where they've joined forces like we have with the county and the city?
I think you're the only one.
Statewide, we're the only one.
I believe so, yeah. I know when we started this about 3 years ago, we were the only ones, and I don't think that's changed. And I don't think it's for lack of interest. I think it's sometimes, I think it's looking at the leadership of the three entities and their willingness to work together. I don't mean to pander here, but it's worked, and that doesn't happen everywhere.
Do you think it's good?
I think it's unbelievably effective because legislators aren't familiar with that type of group coming in, because we'll sometimes go in with a representative from each entity. Mr. Fix might be down here, Executive Fix might be down there with the mayor and the executive.
Does it save us much money? I know it's about $30,000 for the city, for each of us.
Saves
so
you a lot of money.
$90,000. So it saves us as a group as well?
It does, yeah. I was joking when I said it saves you a lot of money. But it does. I mean, there are some efficiencies, absolutely. And particularly because you agree on a legislative objective sheet. So now that you've got three entities supporting the same objectives, but your team in Olympia, Mr. Buchholz and I, along with you, can advance one agenda. So I think it's very effective.
Good.
Yeah.
The fighting's on the other side of the wall.
Pardon me?
The fighting is on the other side of the wall.
Well, I know that legislators I've asked that question appreciate that we have a cohesive voice, and we have individual things that we obviously ask about, but the folks I've talked to have said that it's nice to know that we're all on the same page, and there's not going to be a big fight for local tax dollars to go to this pet project or that pet project. So
well put.
I think it's effective for us, and especially with us, because I think that, alluding a bit to my earlier comment, it might be easy for the Port of Bellingham to get lost in these bigger discussions, because billion-dollar discussions, and we're talking at most in the tens of millions. So it's a much bigger issue, and that we can share, and we become a much bigger issue if we can share the agenda. Yeah.
We always hear that the budget's cut and there's no money. How much increase in revenue was there for the state in 1 year compared to the next?
That's a good question. Because I mentioned about $4 billion, that might be slightly high. It might be high threes billion increase. But what you're asking is how much did it increase for 15-17 projections over 13-15 projections? And I don't know the answer to that, but I can get it for you. I know that this is not what you're asking, but
Well, you read the paper, it sounds like it always went down, and it didn't. It went up, and I'm just wondering how much it went up, the revenue.
yeah, well, we're talking about projections. I mean, as we know from Montka, it doesn't always happen, but right now the projections are coming. I mean, the revenues are coming in ahead of projections for regular tax, not the Montka dollars, but the regular tax revenue. Right. But you can say $4 billion for 15-17.
And we talk about this transportation package that we finally got and how great it is. The average person sitting on I-5 between Bellingham and Seattle really doesn't feel we even have a transportation package. Where'd the bulk of that money go?
You're right, and I see it between Olympia and Tacoma and Seattle as well. Even the legislators and the governor wouldn't claim, I don't believe, I've heard them say something to the effect of, this isn't going to solve all our problems, but we do have to start somewhere. And it is a big package. The last one we did, if I remember correctly, it was a nickel and then 9.5 cents, I think in that order or reverse. But that was a decade to 12 years ago. So now we're talking basically a 12-cent increase, in one package. But it had been a decade since we did it, so we were overdue and trying to make up for lost time a little bit. So much of the money, to answer your question, goes toward, repairing bridges that need fixing. But a lot of it, candidly, a lot of it, you can look at the numbers, are used to hit and complete the 520 project that required a lot of money. The North-South Freeway in Spokane received a lot. But some of those big projects, there's no way around it. They just have to be done because they carry so many people. That doesn't mean that they're more important, but because the money has to be spread out around the state. And I think you can look all around the state and find a considerable number of projects. We had a really good list of funding projects up here in this area with the I mentioned them, but Slater Road, Iowa Street, Baker View, the I-5 Blaine exit. That's not all of them, but those are some pretty big ticket items that were funded up here. And it won't solve the problem. We have to keep finding ways to invest further.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Jorgensen, any questions? Okay, thank you very much, Mr. McBride. Appreciate it.
Thank you for your time.
One final question. Did you get new eyeglasses?
I did, I think. Yes. I'm finding I need new ones periodically.
Look good on
More
you.
frequently than before. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Recognize it for a minute.
What I'd like to do next is just give a quick preview of the 2016 priorities from the port, the city, and Whatcom County. And this would be a draft proposed agenda. I'd like to get your feedback, comment, and then we'll bring that back to you for approval. So again, I think our top priority is the model toxics control funding. We're going to work hard to get the unfunded projects that we had that were on the list. There's a $39 million in ecology bond that they're proposing to fund those projects, and we're going to support that. Looked at that and also general fund shifts. Although it will be competitive, there's about $89 million in capacity through the state, and there's about $300 million plus in requests so far. So the model toxics control account, both short-term and long-term fixes, will continue to be a priority for this session and into the next sessions. Implementing those transportation and infrastructure projects that were funded will be a priority. Rail safety, we're looking at funding at-grade crossing improvements, so Laurel into the waterfront district, that'll be a priority. Criminal justice and social services funding, protect local revenue sharing. It was good they got the liquor tax and the marijuana tax went back to the local jurisdictions, and it's good for Whatcom County and aquatic invasive species control. So that's real similar to the agenda that we had before, and a little preview, and so we'll look for your feedback, take that back to our respective bodies, and bring it back to you for approval. Just a quick note on the federal legislative agenda. We also have a standing amount with Van Ness Feldman, kind of a use it as needed basis for any federal issues that come up. We had that during the past year. We didn't use any of the money. I think it's about $30,000. One of our top federal legislative priorities is funding the Squalicum Waterway maintenance dredging. We're working with the Pacific Northwest Waterways Association, with the Army Corps of Engineers, with Bellingham Cold Storage, and the other tenants around that waterway. And so there might be a need to use some of that federal lobbying dollars, but at this point we don't anticipate it, but we'll be coming back and looking to keep that fund available in case we do need it. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Commissioner McCauley, just a quick addition to your comment about the per diem rate. That was actually, it's my understanding through the Washington Public Ports Association, that was advanced by some of the smaller ports that do use that per diem rate. They don't have, a lot of them are kind of one-man organizations. There's 75 ports throughout the state that do use that per diem rate. I think it was like $25 per day, and it hadn't been tagged with inflation, and so it was to bring it up to, kind of federal standards for per diem reimbursement.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, any questions, gentlemen? Thank you very much, Mike.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Okay, our next item is a presentation again on our budget.
Okay, Tamara Sobczak, Director of Finance. Commissioners, today we've got not only a budget update for you, but a third quarter financial results as well. And in the past, I've done this in two separate updates, but today I've combined the two, so if something maybe doesn't make sense or you want me to slow down, please speak up. So I always like to start looking at financial results with the balance sheet. It's kind of the umbrella, looks at the strength of the organization. 9 months ago, we had assets totaling about $393 million, liabilities of just under $174 million, resulting in net assets of just under $220 million. 9 months later, the end of September, our assets stayed the same, but we were able to reduce our liabilities by about $3 million. That's just standard paying off our long-term debt, resulting in net assets of about $223 million. Looking at a 6-quarter net asset trend, it is still upward trajectory, but definitely flattening. So here's where I'll be toggling between the third quarter results and the budget results. Looking at the
Cameron,
third.
sorry,
Yes.
I'm still focused on that last slide. I don't recall seeing something like this before, and if I have, I'm just failing to recall. What is this telling us?
So what this tells us in the last 6 quarters, what our net assets look like. Net assets are assets and then subtract your liabilities, and that's what's left over. So that's really the strength of the organization. The dip in the fourth quarter is every single year we adjust for environmental liability, so that increases our liability and decreases our net assets. But we like to look at the trajectory, not the ups and downs.
But you called it out as flattening. Why would you?
Sure. So as net income, so I'll hit on the airport because that's an easy target. When those revenues were high and net income was a lot higher, the curve was higher because our net income was higher. But now, as we're seeing some pressures to our net income, these net assets are not growing as quickly. And so that's what the flattening is.
Have we had net assets above $223 million ever? Or is this our all-time high?
You know, I don't know. I can't answer that. I believe this is our all-time high, but I would have to check.
Thank you.
So looking at, this is the first 9 months of the year-to-date versus year-to-date budget. These are our operating divisions. The blue box is the year-to-date actuals, and then the yellow boxes are the budget, the 9 months budget. Revenues for these operating divisions have come in just over $17 million to an $18 million budget. That's mainly due to the airport. Expenses came in just over $10 million to an $11.5 million budget. Again, that's just responding to those decreased revenues. We're trying to keep expenses down. So this next slide is, I'm going to toggle between third quarter and budget. So this is 2015 projected. So at the end of the year, this is what we project will happen. And then looking at 2016 budget. So we're expecting those operating divisions to come in about $22 million in revenue. And then we're projecting a 2016 budget of $22.3 million as well. Expenses, we're expecting $13.5 million, and then projecting $14.6. And I'll go into a little bit more detail and explain what this is about. You want to wait for you?
You're probably going to explain this, but the $1 million difference in expenses is basically the airport.
I will explain it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. And if I don't, we'll come back to it. Okay, so looking at the airport, this is the first 9 months. $5 million in revenue so far to about a $6 million budget. That's not unexpected. We've seen this happen. But in response to that, we have held our expenses, really tried to cut costs, and come in about $4 million to a $4.6 million budget. Looking forward at the airport, we expect the year end to come in at about $6.5 million, and we're budgeting for 2016 almost $6.9 million. Expenses, we expect to come in about $5.4 million, and we're budgeting about the same for 2016. So looking at the marinas, year-to-date, they are right on track for budget, and we did seasonalize their budget this year. So $5.8 million year-to-date, and that's right on budget. And expenses, sorry, I'm losing my place there. Expenses came in just over $2 million to a $2.2 million budget. And we just continue to look for ways to save costs but still provide good customer service in this division. So we don't want to cut costs too much.
On that, the extra money, we'll call it, where does that come from to level out the payments for everybody? Is that commercial? Is there a...
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Question regarding the commercial fishermen, or is it regarding the savings and expenses here? Where does that money go?
Yeah.
The savings for the expenses here, I believe, would go into a fund to replace capital infrastructure in the future.
Okay.
And pay any debt.
Thank you. Yes, that very well.
Looking at the marinas projected year end and then budget, we're projecting their revenues to come in just under $7.3 million, and we're budgeting about $7.3 million as well. And that's just the scheduled rate changes. Expenses, we're expecting to come in just under $2.8 million, and then budgeting just under $3 million. No new additional costs here as we continue to save for future capital. Marine terminals, the shipping terminal and cruise terminal, expecting, the first 9 months came in at $1.7 million to a $1.6 million budget, and expenses were lower than budgeted at $974,000 to a $1 million budget. Looking forward to the projected year-end, $2.2 million for these marine terminals, and we're projecting a pretty good decrease in our budget, just under $2 million, and that's the decrease in ferry service, as well as some, we're expecting the dockage to decrease as well, not have the 12 months that we've had in the past.
Dockage meaning the Horizon
That's right.
ship down there? Thank you.
The expenses are still pretty high, or pretty standard. We're still seeing some pressures with the preventative maintenance and maintenance, as well as we're adding a marketing position to the shipping terminal to help market that. Looking at real estate, the first 9 months have brought in $4.6 million to a $4.5 million budget. This may be a little bit of timing. I'm not sure that the year end will be higher than budget. Expenses came in at just over $1.1 million to a $1.3 million expense. the decrease in expense here is mainly due to our janitorial program has really saved us some money, as well as maintenance costs haven't come in as high as we expected. Looking forward to the budget for real estate, about $6.1 million projected, and then we've budgeted about the same. That's a rounding. And expenses, we expect this division to come in about $1.5 million, and we're projecting 2016 just under $1.8 million. Even though we're expecting the expenses to come in a little bit lower, we want to keep those budget numbers high enough so that we can respond to any higher maintenance costs we might have or if utility costs go up. So we want to make sure that we budget conservatively. Looking at the overhead divisions, this is the admin, executive, planning, and facilities. The first 9 months, pretty minimal revenues there. Expenses have come in just under $2 million to a $2.3 million budget. So again, just a port-wide trying to control expenses as much as possible. Looking forward, we expect expenses to come in about $2.6 million and keeping a $3 million budget there. Moving to the waterfront district, we've seen revenues come in about $787,000 to a $740,000 budget, and no unusual costs here in 2015, so they've come in well under budget, about $200,000 under budget. Looking forward to 2016, we're projecting just over $1 million in revenues and budgeting the same for 2016. And $887,000 projected expenses and budgeting just over $1 million. And this is the same reason as I talked about at real estate. We want to make sure that we budget conservatively so that we can respond to anything that might come up.
What's most that $1 million revenue on the waterfront district?
The tissue warehouse, I believe, is a big part of it. Storecraft.
Okay, thank you.
So all other public divisions are economic development, the public access like meetings and events, commission, things of that nature. Just under $200,000 in revenues, and that's mainly our meeting revenues. Expenses, $1.5 million to a budget of 1.9. So those, again, expenses being held. Looking forward, we're expecting revenues to come in about $250,000, but projecting about $300,000 for 2016. With additional marketing efforts, we're expecting to increase our revenues next year. Expenses are expected to come in about $2.2 million and then budgeted in 2016 of $2.5 million. So that is the operating side. These major capital projects are the same that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Reconfiguring that All-American Marine and Shipyard property of $9.5 million, Shipyard Pier of just under $9 million, C Street Terminal just under $5 million, structural upgrades to the rail span and stub pier of $2.7 million, Log Pond Stormwater Paving Power $2.7 million, upgrade the utilities of the shipping terminal just under $2 million, and then $1.5 million for the Lignin building improvements. So those are the larger projects. There are just a handful of other projects, and we are budgeting about $26 million in capital projects for 2016.
So those all will be completed in 2016?
They'll at least be
Hopefully.
started.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So the asset replacement schedule, there was some talk at our last meeting about this schedule, and I wanted to clear something up as well as tell you what we did about it. The current year, 2015 replacement budget is $350,000. We have, during this year, have identified about $110,000 that was in the budget to be replaced this year, but we decided we could get more life out of it. So we already deferred that 110 to 2016. So the draft budget that you received, that $350,000 for 2016 included the 110 from this year. So that's where we started. But then we took a real good look at the asset replacement for 2016, and we were able to defer more to 2017 and beyond. 5 of the 6 trucks, there were printers and a couple of computers that we deferred. So now we've got a 2016 replacement budget of $185,000. I think that responds to the questions that were brought up at last meeting. Okay. So having said all of that, the projected cash flow for 2016, if everything goes as planned, we'll begin the year with $28.6 million cash. We'll increase it with our operating income from aviation, $2.5 million, marinas, $3.3, marine terminals, a couple $100,000, real estate, $3.5 million, waterfront district, net $2.2 million, and then other public priorities, $2.8 million. So adding to that 28.6, we'll add 14.3. Then we spend it. Net environmental cleanup, we'll spend 2.1. Capital spending, we'll spend 26 million of that. If we issue additional debt, that'll add 11.2 million. And then, of course, we make our debt payments of 7.1 million. That takes out 24 million. Ending cash, $18.9 million. Of that, we need to reserve almost 10 million, leaving us available cash about $9 million. And that available cash is to respond to any additional projects or anything that comes up outside of the reserve, like emergencies. Any questions there?
So our actual cash is going to drop $10 million.
That's what we're projecting, yes.
And the bulk of the capital expenditure of 26,000, once again, what was that?
26 million.
Or million, I mean, I'm sorry.
A lot of infrastructure. So the list that I...
That list, okay.
That list
Thank you. Yeah,
is, yeah.
that's right. Thank you.
Okay, so additional items that the commission has asked a quarterly report on. First, risk management activities. I'm very happy to report no major incidents occurred during the first 9 months of 2015. The major open claims for the port are the 2 that have been on the list. Nothing new has been added, and these claims remain open. The G East boat fire and the AMHS passenger ramp. Again, open claims against the port. It's the 2 that have been on the list, and those still remain open. I have nothing additional to report on those. The stormwater program, third quarter 2015, consistent attainment was achieved about a year ago, and so samples have not been required. All training and record keeping are in compliance. Looking at our safety report, the safety committee held a contest to come up with a safety slogan earlier in the year, and this was the winner: a safe port away from home. Promote safety, operate safely, respond safely, and teach safety. And from that, the entire year, we've had 1 recordable injury, resulting in an incident rate of 1.03 and 0 lost workday rate. So I don't know if it's the slogan that did it or, but something's working. So I just have a few pictures of some great work that's been going on with around the port. Squalicum Yacht Club parking lot was paved, and they are very pleased. This really created a nice entrance for them. The Yacht Club did some exterior painting and some additional work on the entry, and so this has created, the paving has created just a nice entry for them. And then the Whatcom Waterway cleanup is I guess the thing to talk about. Here's a few photos. Clearing bank of concrete debris at west and east ends. So you'll see work going on there. We have driving sheet piling at the east end. So the top left is the actual piling, and then the bottom right is when it's complete. Pretty interesting if you've never seen that done. And this is the east end, sheet pile excavation, dolphins were removed, dredging was completed, and then on the right, log pond area awaiting cap material. And then this is a nice photo of the dredging in the main channel. You can see the work actually being done. So, any questions, feedback, comments on the budget or financials?
Really nice report and nice graphics.
Yeah.
Really, really nice. Do you have any questions, Commissioner?
I do have a pile of questions. I'm not entirely certain this is a correct moment for them. So I've gone through the last, I just got louder. Was that me? All right. I've gone through the last iteration of the budgets. Thank you very much for tightening up. I appreciate that on the asset replacement. I think we all appreciate that. And shout out to the staff that took a hard look at what was critical and what wasn't, and figured out a way to make some stuff last a little bit longer. That's awesome. So the questions I've got, Rob, would you like me to give these to you for comments? Because a lot of them are pretty specific. Would that be the best way?
I think that's so, yeah. If you can
Because
give
I've
me
got
a
about
list.
50 or so specific questions.
Yeah, I think so. We've got, you'll be hearing one more budget presentation in early November, and then the second meeting in November will come to you for approval. So if you want to get me those questions, we can have a lot of discussions between now and then on the items.
So I'll just ask a few today. I noticed that in the expense categories, you always have electricity, gas, and that sort of thing. It seems like there's some pretty significant changes. Some divisions have the cost go up, and others have them going down. All of them significant enough that what I basically did this time was look and see where were the big changes. And in one line item it was a $4,000 change, and some other line items are $100,000 changes. But there were pretty significant changes for that particular line item. So that one's been a little confusing going through this budget. How that's worked out, why there would be some big changes in water as well. So does anybody have an idea about why each division shows some rates to go up and some to go down?
Well, if you're comparing to this year's budget, yeah, because we try and base it on what's actually going to happen next year. And so they're looking at their trend for the year, and one department may be up a little bit and the other's down. So that trend's going to continue into the next year.
Okay, and I'm assuming that you're getting better information as you go through. So last year's, and we're looking at last year's budget, not actual last year's expenses.
That's right. That's where the discrepancy is. I think if you were to look at the actual expenses this year to the actual budget for this year, you'd see those same variances. That same department should be up. That's up for the 2016 budget. The same department should be down. That's down.
And one other question while I'm on this subject, and then I think I'll let it go and just go through this
please.
with you. There is in the aviation. I'm going to ask a marine terminals question. In aviation, it looks like we have a salary and wage increase. I just saw this in one line of 19%, but the corresponding, I'm assuming this is for, I don't know what that's for.
Well, we went without a director of aviation now for, by the time one's brought in, it'll be June, July, August, September, October, so 5 months. So more than almost half your year, you didn't have the key position in that department. Whereas next year, we anticipate we'll have 12 months of that position.
So the salary and wage line went up 19%, but the employee benefits line went up 7%. I'm not assuming that the salary...
They're not going to go up
at the same rates.
Yeah, they're not going to go up dollar for dollar because first of all, the former director may have had more people on benefits, right? If you have children and a spouse, that's going to cost more.
Some assumptions in that one.
Correct.
Okay. And in administration, the salaries and wages went up 20-some thousand, but benefits went down 70.
And you're in administration?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we moved some people around there, I think, is the
That's
result.
it.
We had some.
Because I think overall, we talked about this, overall, the adjustments aren't dramatic, but I'm seeing it individually, they seem to be pretty significant.
You know what, we need to get you an overall payroll summary because we've moved some people around department to department.
Well, that's fine. That's
And that way you can see what the overall payroll is, and I think it's pretty consistent. I think that'll be a helpful slide to have is if we can do a port-wide payroll comparison.
Yep.
Oh, and then dockage dockage and marinas, marine terminals. Big drop, 100 and some thousand. Is that an expectation of something happening?
Horizon Fairbanks, 6 months.
Okay, and Dan, you're here. Matson took over that ship. And is there some expectation that they're going to move it now versus we thought that was going to happen this year too?
They are looking at scrap price, and so they know what their expenses are to hold it here, and they're looking at the scrap market, and so we continue to provide them good customer service. They keep current in their bill, and so they're still here.
Okay, but I think it's the safe bet is to not count on it.
Right. I would have expected it to be gone by now, but they've decided to hold that based on what they think is going to be a rising scrap market, so they've held it for a while.
All right. So when we get the heads up that it's leaving, we need to let the public know so we can have a big party, a little farewell, because I think some people will be sad.
We'll be sad to see it go.
It's iconic at this point. So
I'm sad to see it go at $1,000 a day income. I'm sad to see it go. Can you get another one?
yeah, we'll free up 800 feet.
They've actually,
right?
It looks like they're activating one of their newer vessels that had been laid up in China, and so they've actually been talking to us about bringing that here.
Wonderful. Bring it here.
So we may just swap them out, and the new one that's coming is actually longer. So, but that's completely speculative right now.
That would look awesome.
We've had two before, but with the Walk and Waterway project, we couldn't put two out there now. Yeah.
A lot of people complain about that till they hear the price that we're getting.
Yeah.
So,
Thanks, Dan.
any other
No,
questions?
I'm good.
You sure?
That's it for now. Trust me, you don't want me to start on this one.
No.
Commissioner Jorgensen, okay. Thank you very much, Tamara. Very good. Our next item is another presentation from Adam Fulton. No?
So I'll handle that. We had a bit of an emergency down in Fairhaven. Obviously, we have purchasing procedures, state law that we must follow when we purchase items or services, but in the event of an emergency, we're allowed to vary from that a little bit to expedite the repair. In this case, we had a force main, and a force main is where a pump is on one end pumping sewage through the pipe, and the force main broke, and it started to put raw sewage in the Fairhaven area. We declared an emergency to get that addressed as soon as possible. There was a contractor in the area, I believe, that was able to do the work, and so we just contracted with them rather than going through the bidding process to do that. I believe the work is done. Is that correct, Adam?
You're correct.
So the work is now completed, and we're just informing you that we did declare that emergency and get that work done. If you want any more information on that, including the contract that we did with Faber, we're happy to share that with you.
It was extremely old, right?
It was plus 50 years.
Correct.
Adam's pretty talkative today.
I've got the next item, right?
Okay. Channeling his inner teenager.
He sounds like Camden.
Well, no design and no permit and got the job done. That's as good as it gets.
It's a good work, Adam.
I'm not saying anything.
Okay. Would you like to take the next action item as well?
Yes, if we're finished with this,
This is an update, right? Okay.
we could move on to the action item. If you could please read it, Diane.
Approval of a motion ratifying the contract to be issued to Faber Construction to repair the sewer force line at the Fairhaven Marine Industrial Park, FMIP, for an estimated amount of $27,778.69, plus a 10% contingency for a total authorized amount of $23,956.56.
Thank you, Commissioners. Adam Fulton, Director of Facilities. What I've drawn there in purple is the route of the old line, this force main that Director Fix related to. And over the past 8 months, the line has just been getting hit and re-hit.
I don't see any purple.
Is there an annotator button I hit, or
Am I missing it?
over here, isn't it? Not yet. Right here, isn't it?
Yep, it's got to be green. There you go.
There we go.
Hey.
Apologize, Commissioners. So if I can zoom in just a little bit, what you'll see is This pavement in this area is distressed, and it's because this line has been broken several times in its past, and we've wondered what's been going on, and we keep patching the asphalt, and then just in its recent history, it's been hit 3 times. I'll show you where. Yeah, first our buddy John Hergesheimer hit it right there in his project, and then then Patelco came along and hit it right there, and then the city came along and hit it right there. So honestly, in that last 60 feet, the line was more patch than pipe, as well as being old and brittle. So our emergency solution.
Did you give them the number for 811 next time?
Actually, it was
in case.
It was
Oh,
not shown on the
before we dig?
locate. Pardon me, Commissioner? Oh, so what we did was install this red line. We intercepted the line right in this area and just ran simply a new today's technology line out to the city's sewer main that's right here. So we did that under emergency. They've done the work. Took 3 days, and we're in better shape now. So, the commissioners have any questions about that?
So the contract's been issued, so this is kind of an after the fact. You're ratifying the fact that we issued this contract. It's a procedural thing.
We're okay in what you've already done.
Correct.
It raises the question, what if we say no? Then we just aren't going to pay the bill, right? That's what happens.
Yeah, that would be a problem.
You were put on notice, though, that they were going to do it in an emergency
I wonder
situation.
if that's ever happened anywhere. I don't know.
I'm sure it has.
I'm not, there's no problems. No
So,
problem here.
any other questions before we vote on this? Commissioner Jorgensen, did you have any questions?
No,
No.
I've been around sewage a lot, so I know all the answers to
Oh,
that.
he's got his boots on.
Should clarify what that means, but I'm not going to bother to do that.
Hearing no other questions, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Passes 3-0.
Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you, Adam. Dan, if you could read our next action item, please.
Authorize the Executive Director to execute Professional Services Agreement, PSA, Amendment Number 10 with Berger ABAM for shoreline modeling, additional project management, and development of an historic mitigation plan for the Carpenter Building for the Harris Avenue Pier Replacement Project in the amount of $44,017 for a total authorized amount of $1,177,167.
Thank you, Diane. Good afternoon, Commissioners. John Hergesheimer, Senior Project Engineer. This is the final step on a project that has started several years ago to get the nationwide 38 permit for the Harris Avenue Pier Replacement and Cleanup Project. In the course of going through the permitting cycles, the response came back from the Corps of Engineers and the Department of Archaeological and Historic Preservation with the state that we need to mitigate for the Carpenter Building if indeed the Carpenter Building is to come down. The building is 100+ years old. We went through an analysis during the permit process to go through the assessment of the building, get the recommendation from the consultant on the value of that building, the historic value of the building, and there is historic value left in the building. It has not been significantly modified enough to negate the historic value of the building. And so then the next step is to negotiate with the Corps of Engineers and the DAHP at the state to develop a mitigation plan for that building. So 2 things are required for that. The first is to tell them why the building has to come down as opposed to being relocated or removed and rebuilt in another location. So that work has been done as in anticipation of the question for the timing of the permit. And the answer to that is it's about $11 million to take down that old building and relocate it on some future or some new site somewhere along the waterfront. So the result is it's just prohibitively expensive to do that. So that was the first cut we had to make for the building. The second, and what's before you today, is one of the major components of this, is to go through and develop the historic mitigation plan that actually puts forth the basis of the memorandum of understanding that would need to be in place between the Corps, DHP, and the Port for how we're going to mitigate that building. And that is very similar to what was done at the GP buildings for mitigation of those historic structures. So this, then a major part of this PSA amendment is to develop that plan and get that approved as part of issuance of a permit, either a nationwide 38 permit, which we're currently under, or even if we proceed in a different way to do a renovation, replacement of the pier and the carpenter shop, we will need to do this work as well to touch that building. The second component, major component of this PSA amendment is to do wave modeling analysis for beach erosion of the materials that would be removed as part of the cleanup and then replaced with new material. The Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife came back with a requirement to rightly show that the material that's placed there is going to remain there, will not be eroded and carried downstream through littoral action on wave currents and deposited somewhere else. So that work has been done, and this PSA amendment then covers that work. So the total then of the what's before you today is a request to add $44,017 to the PSA by using the remaining contingency that's been previously approved, and to do some adjustments in other tasks within that budget that have not been expended but can be reallocated for these uses. Any questions?
We're going to spend $44,000 to prove that that building is not a historical site so we can tear it down?
It's actually more than that, because we've had to spend approximately $12,500 to show that it could not be, it's not feasible to relocate it. We had to go through and do a physical assessment of the building, how it could be moved, to come up with a cost estimate to show that it's not practical to relocate the building. And then we actually have to spend approximately $60,000 to do the historical mitigation plan. But it's a requirement whenever a building is older than 50 years and it's historic in nature, it's a requirement to go through this process if we want to take the building down. It's part of the core Section 106 requirement for mitigation of historic structures. We did the same thing on the log pond or the GP site buildings.
So, John, can we give this building away?
Well,
Hey, hipsters want all kinds of crazy things nowadays, you guys. So, not in all seriousness, can we do that?
That's a great question. I don't really know the answer to that. It has to be removed, and to remove it is going to be a big expense. And what we showed is, because of the way it's built, it's not built in a standard frame structure. It's all the big internal structural timber frame, right? So the way to move that intact, other than take it all down piece by piece and then rebuild it, which is extremely labor intensive, is to basically you come in and you cut the building off at the pier, slide a big table, structural table underneath it, slide that table onto a barge and transport it to some other place in the Bellingham area, and then slide it off the table onto land, onto a prepared foundation, assuming that there's a site that can take it.
Yeah, my assumption would be somebody would just dismantle the building and reuse the parts in some other method, but.
Right.
I've been in that building when a forklift is driven by and the whole building shakes.
Yes, sir, that's
I don't
true.
understand where it's historical and, what was it, the cannery years ago, so it's a historical building?
It is a historical building. It's a historical structure built over approximately 100 years ago. It has enough of the original components of the building intact to meet the criteria for the historical building.
What happens if you vote no? If I vote no, it doesn't get torn down? You don't want to spend $44,000 just to say that it's...
Then the building will stay there in its current location.
Well, there you go. What if, so the building cannot be even dismantled without this assessment?
Correct.
So,
But it will be dismantled after the assessment.
And we can't fix our pier with the building there unless we fix the building, which would cost another $500,000.
We could remove and rebuild the Harris Avenue Pier, but it would cost about $400,000 to brace the Carpenter Building and its pier to keep it upright while the new pier is being built. The reason is both of them are fairly old structures and they're sort of like leaning against each other. So if you remove one, you got to brace the other, or you remove them all.
Both of them are barely standing. I mean, they're...
That's true, but it doesn't say it's structurally sound or adequate. It just makes the analysis on whether it's an historic building.
It's on the register, I assume.
it's not registered.
It's not?
No.
It's not registered, but it's been determined to be eligible for registration, and that's the key. That's that first threshold to meet or not meet, and we've met that threshold.
Well, I think it's got to come down, but it's just a sad situation to have to spend $44,000 to get it off the registry. But if we have no choice, I guess we have no choice.
It's one of the costs of demolishing an historic structure. Correct.
To answer some of Commissioner McCauley's concerns, the buildings coming down the GP side, I believe, are 95%, if not more, being recycled. And I would anticipate this building would be similar, where we'd hire a contractor that would utilize as many recycling methods as they could.
Yeah, I think in this case, because the wooden structure has way more value than I mean, the GP ones, where there's a lot of recycled content, the steel and that sort of thing, and maybe some rubble. For
But
the use.
that'll be a separate issue. At this point, right now, we're just going to spend $44,000 to get it off the registry.
44 to study it.
But this came up with Building 8, which I'm going to ask about later anyway, over FMIP, right? So looking at Building 8, it's tall, gray, looks ugly, but the timbers inside have a lot of value. So we may not want it, but somebody might just take it off our hands for nothing. We don't have to spend more than $40,000 as opposed to approaching it differently, which would be to show up with an excavator and take it down. Right?
That's correct. There are many ways to take this building down once we get the approval, which is based on this mitigation. The mitigation has to be done, and so part of the mitigation is a study on you develop historic logging, some museum pieces or whatever, and develop that to preserve the historic integrity of the area is the way it's presented.
Just so a lot of this is close to the business that I'm in, but there is a local cabinet maker that has an entire line of cabinets based on the wood that was reclaimed from a building downtown that was removed. It's been replaced with a modern building, but the wood has a lot of value, more so than many of us would believe. So there is demand for this stuff.
Oh, I don't doubt that. I don't doubt at all the timbers are worth a lot, and they're old timbers, and recycle them. That's great.
Again, I reiterate the bottom line to this: if we need to have the building come down, we need to do the historic mitigation plan and get that approved through DAHP and the Corps before we get our permits.
Okay, then. This will be one of your better votes here at the end of your tender,
I
Commissioner.
say maybe.
Okay, any other questions, gentlemen?
No, it's just,
Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
And I reluctantly.
See, those were like maybe,
Yeah,
those were maybe ayes. And
Wow. Okay, that's what we've come to.
we are unenthusiastically in favor.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next item is on the action items is a real estate action item. Could you please read it, Diane?
A motion by the Port Commission to approve a modification to Point Roberts Press Incorporated's harbor land lease in Blaine Harbor.
Darren, good afternoon, Commissioners. Terry Lahi, real estate representative. This modification of lease has two items to it. One is we've renegotiated the rents for the next 5 years. For their main building area, the exclusive use area, we've kept the rents for the first 2 years stable and then a 2% increase after that. They also have non-exclusive use of the parking area. That rent has been kept stable for the full 5-year term. The other item of the modification includes moving out their requirement to build a second building on the site by 10 years. This was initially part of their lease, and they were supposed to build it by 2009. Their current building was built in 2007, and to this date is not fully occupied. They've had a very difficult time decreasing the vacancy in that building, even though that they are renting most of the second story of the building for their own office spaces. So because of that, we have proposed moving out the construction of the second building by about 10 years. They can build prior to that, and they have indicated that as soon as the market recovers, they have every intent of meeting this requirement. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Is this a historical building? No.
No, but I'm going to put a shout out to the publishers of the Northern Light. That's the oh shoot, why am I drawing a blank on this? The Point Roberts Press, who also I think has a publication across in Point Roberts. They received a record number of 21 awards at the Washington Newspaper Publisher Association's annual convention just here in October. They took first place in 7 categories, so this apparently is a pretty big deal for a very small town newspaper. So it's kind of cool that they're on port property, and we get to help them with whatever success that we can help them with.
I think there were 21 awards.
21 awards, yeah, certainly a high quality publication there in Blaine. Yeah.
Good. Any other comments or questions, gentlemen? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. So it comes to new business. Do you have any new business, Commissioner?
I'm all out of my giggles.
I have one item. Well, actually, I have a couple items. One, the first one is Perry Estridge, who's on our BIAC committee out at the airport, is ill and has taken a temporary leave. And Lonnie Rom, he represents tourism on that. And Lonnie Rom, who's head of the tourism for Whatcom County, our executive director for the tourism, has made an indication she'd like to serve on that committee in a temporary role. And I realize we should, if it was going to be a permanent position, we need to put it out for everyone to look at and have an opportunity to sign up for it. But I think in this particular circumstance where it's a temporary position, I would like to see us vote to have her represent the tourism on that committee.
So do Lonnie and Perry, do they work in the same office then?
They do not.
So how was Perry representing the tourism industry?
Well, it was just, that was the slot that was open at the time.
Okay.
And so he applied for it. And
I do think he reports back to Lonnie,
Back
and he
to
does
Lonnie.
communicate
Report
with
to her,
Lonnie about upcoming meetings and agendas and all that. So he gets a lot of input from the Visitors and Conventions Bureau and the tourism from Lonnie.
Okay. If Lonnie can, fill in the time, sure.
are you in agreement? With that? Good. So one other, so do we need to take any action?
I'd take a vote just for grins and giggles. Yep.
Do you need to?
Yep.
Thank you, Counselor. So any other questions? All those in favor of having Lonnie Rom serve on that BIAC on a temporary basis, signify by saying aye.
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 Passes 3-0. Since we need to have these meetings in public, there's a couple issues that have come up that we may want to take action on as a commission. And one is the talk during election time is to have 5 commissioners again. Mm-hmm. We're one of the largest ports that doesn't have 5 commissioners. And I just was kind of wondering what you folks, what you two felt about that, if it's something we want to pursue. It was on the ballot, I think.
How long ago was that?
Commissioners, can I give you a little history on that?
2012.
Yeah. So one port has done it or had attempted to do it, and the Port of Bellingham considered it. The statute is actually quite clear. The statute says that the commission can seek to move to a 5-member board, and then there's an election. And if you do that, then you no longer use the 3 county legislative districts. You create 5 districts. Then in a separate election, you can then, only the commission, it also can be a petition, by the way, to move to a 5-member board. So either the electorate can do it or you can do it. Once you have a 5-member board, then only the commission can seek to create 2 at-large positions and return to the county legislative districts. There's 3 county legislative districts. And if you think about the logic of it, when we were involved in this in 2012, there was a group that disagreed with that analysis. They hired a lawyer who subsequently agreed with that analysis. But if you think about the logic of it, is once the commission moves to 5 members, you create these districts. And it's up to the commissioners then to move it back to 2 at-large positions, because that can tend to concentrate power in the cities like Bellingham or Everett or Olympia. And so that's kind of how that statute was written. It was written a long time ago, but it's actually a fairly well thought out, in my opinion. So if you move to 5, you can put it on a ballot, or the electorate can. The port pays for the election. If there's 5 commissioners elected, or 5 commissioners authorized, then the next election you gross up the commission, if you will, to 5. And then you create 5 legislative or 5 commissioner districts in the county. They have to be of about equal population. In Anacortes, as you know, has 5, and there are companies that come out and use the census data and help you do that. It's not a very big deal. They do it all over the state. And so that's the process if you choose. It's totally your decision.
It would then have to be 5 districts? You couldn't go back to the 3 existing ones and do 2 at large?
At the next election, the commission, the public can't force it, but the commission could say, we'd like to go back to 2 at large and 3 commissioner districts. You can do that as well. You can vote that as a separate vote.
And you can do that simultaneously. It doesn't have to be at the next election. In 2012, we put both those measures on the ballot at the same time.
And that was, if that had passed, there would have been a legal challenge to that. Mm-hmm. And the Port of Everett did it, and people said, well, look, the Port of Everett did it. The problem with the Port of Everett doing it is it failed, and so there never was a legal challenge. Likewise, our failed, there's never a legal. The problem is that once you create the 5 districts, then the 5 commissioners have to agree to put it on the ballot to go back to 3 legislative districts and 2 at large.
So you have to have an election in the 5 districts and then take it back to 3 districts?
Well, you won't even have 5 districts. You just have 5 commissioners.
Yeah, you first have to create 5 commissioners with 5 districts.
With 5 districts.
Right. And then once you seat those 5 commissioners, then the 5 commissioners can vote by a majority to go back to 2 at-large and 3 legislative districts. But I caution that that's the reading of the statute that I read it that way, the lawyers hired by the other side read it that way. Port of Everett did not do it that way and went to a ballot, and they lost, and so it never was, nobody ever asked about it. And subsequently, the Port of Bellingham had an election. Did we have the election with two of them?
Yeah, we had an election with both of them on there. I remember the gentleman from the county royal, I can't remember the gentleman from the county's name, works in the auditor's office. He blessed that and said it was okay. Now he's another lawyer. So we've had probably 3 lawyers weigh in on this issue.
So if I can jump in at this point.
And let me just make one other point, Commissioner.
Okay.
It may be possible, you cannot put it as one ballot proposition. In other words, let's create, you might be able to create it as 2 ballot propositions, but I don't think so, because the requirement to go back to 3 with 2 legislative districts says when you have a district of 5 commissioners, they can vote to go back to 3, 2 at large. And so you haven't yet got 5 commissioners to make the vote, if that makes sense. But anyway, it's an open question. That's the legal issue as far as I know it. And Mr. Fix is right. Nobody's ever got to the point of figuring out what the courts would say about it, because none of them have ever passed. Us and Everett, neither of them passed.
Ours wasn't close last time.
But it is totally your decision.
So there are a lot of different factors at play here on this issue, and I've been wondering this about this year's elections myself because of the propositions that are on the ballot. If there are 5 districts that are created by the vote in November, it's probably going to be challenged. Okay, so doing anything now is probably premature because we could just be wasting time.
You mean 5 county council?
Five county council districts. I do not know what the law says about if we can have our own districts and just have 3, or if they have to, by law, follow what the existing council districts are. It's just always been the same.
The law, when I first started representing ports, you created your own districts. And there were districts, the county, in this county was sliced horizontally. Then, and the terms were 6 years. And so every 2 years you elected 1 new commissioner. Then the bill changed to change your terms to 4 years, and you elected 2, then 1, 2, then 1. And it mandated you use the county legislative districts.
Is this a state rule?
Yeah, state law.
Okay. So we can't have 3 districts anyway, according to state law. We have to follow the mandated 5 districts if that passes at the ballot.
Well, it's unclear if that passes on the ballot right now, because the state law contemplates you'll use the county legislative districts, which is typically 3. Mm-hmm. So you may have to, Commissioner, you're exactly right. It's uncharted waters if Whatcom County creates 5 legislative districts and there's only 3 of you, then you may have to create your own commissioner districts. But once you go to 5 commissioners, the port statute provides that you create your own districts. The interesting question, Commissioner, that I think you're getting at is, if the county already has 5 districts, do we use the county's 5 districts, or do you create your own districts? And I don't know the answer to that.
I would say right now, let's just stand by and wait and see if the county's charter is amended. Yeah.
So there's no way to keep 3 districts and add 2 at large.
It's a 2-step process, in my opinion, but as Mr. Fix points out, others agree it can be 2 votes on the same ballot.
No wonder voters get confused.
Boy, no kidding.
It's just crazy.
And what happens is the courts won't help decide these issues until things pass. They won't say, take it off the ballot, I don't think it works this way. The typical response of our court system is say, well, why don't you all vote on it, and then if it passes, then I'll talk to you about it. And so we don't get any clarity until you get a vote through.
And then a legal challenge.
And then a legal challenge, correct. And so I've not been following the county council legislative districts, but it's very probable that someone's going to challenge that if it passes.
Well, I agree then. There's no point in talking about it now. Another question under new business I had is I just don't feel it's right that the ports, in an election, the port commissioners have an unlimited amount of money they can raise from one individual or one entity. The city and the county is limited to $900 a person.
Well, I think it's every elected person in this state except for port commissioners.
Except for port, well, and some.
Different limits, but limits.
Right. I would love to see those same limits in a port race. Nothing bothers me more than someone trying to buy an election and buy access in a port. It just doesn't smell right. Doesn't pass the smell test for me. So I would really like to see it to where we had the limits. Is there any way we can do that?
Commissioners, you have a member of the Washington Public Ports Association governing body. I don't know which port commissioner is.
Commissioner McCauley is the WPPA.
You can certainly raise that as an issue with the executive committee to bring up with the legislative committee. You also have your lobbyists here, and they certainly can raise that issue with the legislature. But that type of change is a change that needs to occur under state law.
Well, as it is now, it's not all port races in the state of Washington are unlimited amounts, is it?
I don't know the state law, but whatever the state law is the state law.
Really? So for ourselves or Seattle, they're all the same?
I don't know what the state law is because I haven't researched it, but whatever the state law is, I'm taking.
Well, right now there's no limit for Bellingham commissioners. And you're saying that's true for the whole state then?
I would have to read the law and see if there was some kind of cutout for larger port districts or something, but what I'm telling you is it's not a change you can pass as commissioners and impose it on candidates. It comes through state law. And it would be a topic that if you chose to direct your delegate to take up with the Washington Public Ports Association as a legislative issue for the next legislative
session. No, I didn't realize it was a state law. I thought it was a local because.
No, it's a state law.
Okay. Shouldn't have brought either one up, I guess.
Sorry. Decisions there.
No
worries. You've got 200 and some other port commissioners that might be sorry you brought that up.
Well, it just doesn't seem right. I mean, it's weird. There's a reason the city and the county is that way, and during election time, it really comes to focus. But I can see it's more complicated than trying to get a building off the historical registration. So with that in mind,
I have one question.
There we go.
How about that? I think it would be John or possibly Adam in reference to Blaine's Road out to the pier. And I noticed there were some plans made with alternate. You're pointing at somebody. Go ahead.
Sylvia is the lead on that. So can we get Sylvia a microphone?
Is it on? I'm waiting for the question.
Yeah, what's your question?
What do you think is the future, in the future look at this? Are we looking at a year or 2 or 5, or is there any way of, is it a grant? What's happening with that?
Okay. We have some preliminary designs, and as soon as those are final, we'll be distributing those to open them for the public review. We're also getting cost estimates, which we should have probably by the end of this week. We'll have final designs and cost estimates. After that, we're going to have a public process in Blaine, probably early November, maybe early December, to get some input, finalize the designs, and then it'll come back both to the commission and to the city council for how are we going to fund it. We're looking at $1.5 to $2 million, depending on what alternative you select, and then we need to pursue funding for that. There is no firm agreement between the port and city who will pay for the bulkhead design, who will pay for the road, so that needs to yet be negotiated. But, and then after the alternative is selected, I'm thinking that by the end of this year or early next year, you can have a pretty good idea which way you're leaning. Then it leaves to be final design and budget. So it may be a year or two before anything is constructed, depending on how we pay for it.
Okay, I got the impression I saw the degree of projects that were presented by dollars, and $2 million was the least, was it not? Wasn't that for the?
We still don't have final design dollars yet or cost estimates, and there's contingencies. So as soon as those are done, we'll have the range of alternatives. But the design as it's drawn now, the preliminary numbers are not much more than $2 million.
We're checking right now, but I believe the design is budgeted in 2016, which is going to be far less than $1 million. And then I believe we budgeted some money in 2017 to complete that. Yeah. 17 for the design, or 16 for the design?
16 for design, 17 construction.
Thank you.
Okay, I guess I was seeing the amount that was estimated it would be for the minimal fix.
Yeah, I don't believe that appeared on the list of projects you saw today, but it is in your capital replacement budget for, again, 16 for design and 17 for construction.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, gentlemen, anything else for the good of for the good of the order?
I guess I'm done.
It clips in. There you go.
Wow.
I'm just messing around. No, thank you.
I'd just like to point out that we didn't make this complicated world. We're just trying to live in it. Well, with hearing nothing else, we are adjourned.